This episode of the New Medical Nomads podcast is brought to you by Nomadicare. Now, personally, I love Nomadicare. I've used Nomadicare, and I recommend the company to all new travelers. What Nomadicare does is it takes the fear out of getting set up with a bad recruiter, which is the biggest fear that you have jumping into this journey. So they sit down, they interview recruiters, they vet them, get them on a list, and then provide them to you as a free service, as a free recruiter matchmaking service in order to get you started on your journey. Now, usually you only get 2 recruiters going through Nomadicare, but being a listener of the show, you can get 3. So this is how it's going to work. You go to nomadicare.com/Dylan. You will get set up with 3 recruiters to be on your dream team, as well as a guide to get you started on your journey.
The second sponsor of the show is TravCon, the Travelers Conference. I'm super excited to announce them as a sponsor of the show. TravCon was there for me before I got started as a medical nomad, and now I'm actually involved with the planning of the event. So super aligned, super congruent. I've been promoting them before they were even a sponsor, and so I'm excited to have them on. So there are 3 main reasons that you should go to TravCon this year. Number 1, value. This is the cheapest conference to go to as a medical professional, and also the only place that I've ever felt like royalty when you're walking in and all these staffing agencies and all these recruiters want to talk to you, and you're bumping elbows with these travelers and they're interested about your story, about where you're coming from and what you're doing, and it's overall just a really good feel-good event. Number 2 is education and growth. So this conference was founded on the realization that there's a lot to know to be a medical traveler, to be a medical nomad. And so this is where you go to get the most updated tax information. This is where you go for those really niche specific questions on what's it like to travel in an RV and what's it like to travel to Hawaii. And then third, community. This is where a lot of my traveler friends that are very near and dear to my heart right now, this is where we met. So this is where the relationship sparked. It's also one of the only places that you get to go to and see the leaders and meet the leaders of the industry, both on the staffing agency side and on the traveler side, and also get to meet your recruiters face to face that you've been working with. So TravCon is always in September every year. TravCon is also always in Las Vegas. The link is going to be in the show notes for you to get your ticket. I'll be at TravCon. All my friends will be at TravCon. I hope to see you there.
Dr. Steven Stockhausen, where are you at in the world right now?
Vallejo, California.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the New Medical Nomads podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Dylan Calliard. This is the second part of Stephen coming on and talking about negotiations. Dr. Steven Stockhausen.
Yeah, get it right, man.
The first time I had you guys on, I forgot to put that on, and I've never lived it down.
Yeah, I don't think Ellen's let you live it down.
No. Oh, goodness. Ellen is, yeah. By the way, I went to Moab this past weekend, and they had the Dead Horse Run. Is that the one that you guys did, the ultra marathon?
No, but I believe 2 of her best friends did it's like, I don't know, 20 miles or something like that of it. They've been training for a while, so I heard it was gorgeous.
That's nuts. I was just thinking Ellen's a badass and one of the very few people I would never want to mess with in this world. So this episode is about communicating value, and I've been promising dad jokes, so everybody open their umbrellas because it's about to rain some cold, hard facts.
Nice. Nice.
I found the longer I'm a PT, the worse my jokes get.
Yeah. I don't even have them anymore, so that must be telling me something.
Oh, man. So
we might get interrupted by a 2-year-old, just to give you a heads up.
That'll increase ratings.
Look, do you want to come say hi? Say hi, Dylan. Can you say hi?
Hi. How are you?
Oh, I don't think she can hear you. I got the headphones in.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll just mime it then. Oh, well, she knows sign language, right? You got more? That's about all I know.
I don't know if she remembers it.
So last episode, we were talking about building your value as a clinician. This time we were talking about communicating value. And I think this is where clinicians really struggle with. Again, talking around money, we tend to be kind of feel gross about it, kind of shy away from it. We're empathetic. But communicating, I think, is somewhere where we struggle with a little bit more, and that
listeners will probably find more value with this, because there are many clinicians out there who are studs and they are doing the next level thing and they are being smart about it. But this is how you're going to be communicating that when you, one, put it on the resume communication, two, actually get the interview. But oh man, I just answered my first question, but do you have anything to add to that between actually being valuable and then communicating value?
I think the only shift is your goal with what you're trying to communicate. It's all about your audience. And so, we can start right there, becoming valuable, and how you communicate it. That's going to change from clinic to clinic. So as a traveler, if you're changing settings, you might want to change your resume, what the agency submits based on, if you've got who knows how many continuing ed courses that may or may not pertain to your ACL rehab to sport course, isn't going to do you any real good at a acute neuro or whatever it happens to be. It's not going to translate well. So maybe you'd kick that off and you use something else. The idea of having a resume for each individual job, each specific placement, is kind of a unique one that a lot of clinicians don't even think about, especially travelers, because you just have this generic resume that you send off. But that's not what's going to put your best foot forward, and that's not what's going to get you the job. And we were talking about value. If you can't communicate that value right off the bat, you're going to get overlooked. I mentioned before that I was a clinic director a little bit and did some hiring, and we got bombarded with so many resumes. I looked at the top 5. If they were not on the top 5, then I didn't bother giving them a phone call. And so your goal with your resume needs to be, okay, how can I get top 5 of this hiring manager or this clinic director, whoever it happens to be who's filling this position? Try and put yourself in their shoes, and how can I get to the top of the pile? Because then you get the interview, and then once you get the interview, hopefully it's a lock. That's a goal for all of us, and that's really when you have a chance to shine. So having that perspective of who am I doing this for, I think is really, really important. That's a little bit different than just building your career.
Absolutely. And I think there's 2 different pieces to talk about there, with the resume component being communicable through that, being specific. So if you are a nurse and you're applying for that level 1 trauma, what previous experiences have you had in the past that set you up for that? Are you talking about a level 1 trauma? Or are you talking about that really rural hospital that was just 20 beds? And being as laser focused as you can on those. It will take more time, but ultimately that's how you're going to get the better positions. You're looking at these versus the interview with the HR person, who the only 2 questions they ask is, when's your start date and what dates do you need off?
Yeah.
It's going to make your travel career so much more enjoyable. And we all have different journeys. We all have different struggles. So sometimes you get the unfortunate straw of having 3 really hard contracts in a row, and some people won't even have those experiences. But this is a way that you can prevent that and really, again, put your best foot forward, getting on the phone. A line that I use with my recruiters a lot is just get me on the phone with them, because once I get them on the phone, I know, for example, with home health, I didn't have the experience coming in, but I knew if I could get them on the phone, I have a very good, track record of once you're on the phone, I'm able to get the job. And I think the cards are in our favor for that. The odds are against us for the resume. So the more specific you can be and the quicker you can be submitting that will make a huge difference. But then once you get the interview, the person on the other line, they don't want to continue to keep going down that list. If they come across somebody that they're really connecting with, you're going back and forth, you're having a conversation, you're actually a human. And hopefully it's not a robot on the other end, like some of these positions. But you can come across really well. And if they can stop at you, they want to stop at you. And so being really good with these interviews, again, you'll continually get better and better with every interview moving forward. But the odds are in your favor when you actually get them on the phone.
Yeah. So to kind of touch on the resume just real quickly, one of the things that I noticed is a lot of people don't even have a summary of qualifications at the top of their resume, which is, that's your highlight reel. That's your 6 bullet points of why you're the best for this job, and I don't understand why so many clinicians don't put those on a resume. Yes, for people a little bit behind the scenes, a lot of agencies do reformat your resume and send it through in a terrible, terrible format. And I personally always encourage my recruiters to send a PDF of my actual resume, because that's me saying, I know this is the best foot forward. So, you can only control so much, but if you're with an agency that's going to give your actual resume, like the way that you provide to them, make sure those 6 to 8 bullet points at the top hit things that you think are going to be the most important. Because that's, I'm going to read the person's name, if they have any extra credentials next to the name, and then I'm going to read the first half of the page. And if I'm not interested, I'm moving on. Those first 6 points are the first 6 things that you're pretty much going to read. So make sure they are specific to who it is you're trying to get a job with.
That's awesome. I'm glad you brought that up. For those who aren't as familiar with the back end of things, when you're working with a staffing agency and they're submitting you to jobs, for these larger hospital systems, a lot of times they're working with a specific MSP or VMS, and they have a standardized template that they send in. And so the recruiters are going to have to take your resume and they're going to have to enter it into these standardized boxes. However, there's usually a little box that you are able to either give the summary, give the quick bullet points, and that is where you can stand out. And so if you are that nurse who's been traveling for 13 years and you have this massive list of jobs, you can summarize that up and say, hey, I've had a cumulative experience of level 1 trauma hospitals for 9.5 years, something like that. Extra skills, this is where they can go. Since I do have the podcast, I always put this down. I used to be nervous about this actually, because I thought they'd be worried it was distracting me from the job.
Yeah.
But I've started putting this down, and it's helped because they can actually look for me, or they actually search for me. It stands out. And that's also something else, is not every interview is going to be the same. Some are going to be very quick and you have to lead the questions. Some you're going to get the round robin of everybody in that facility. And that's a really good sign that it's going to be a great, great place to work. But they likely, when you get those round robin situations, they will search for you on social media, and you get to play that game of how you present yourself online. With Facebook, there's different ways to share with friends only or share with public. So anything that I do that's clinic related that I think is going to put my best foot forward, if somebody else was looking at this, I'm sure to put those as public. When I do my #ishpatientsay, that's a friend only thing. So if you want to see those, you're going to have to friend request me. That's just a point I wanted to bring up, that interviews are different. But yeah, absolutely. That summary at the beginning is such a big deal, and that's how you stand out. That being said, especially for therapists, you have smaller clinics that are interested in us. And usually at those smaller facilities, they will do emails. So it'll be just a regular email. So it's still nice to have that nice looking template or that nice looking resume that's tailored to that individual. But when you're applying to these VMS positions, they are going to break it down. So for those, you don't have to worry about as much as making it look pretty and using that Helvetica font.
Yeah.
Anything else to add on that?
Not on the resume itself. Yeah. You know what? I do one little thing. Something, and we'll bring this also up with we actually talk about the interview. But one thing to include on the resume, if you have like other jobs, people are really nervous to put non-PT related jobs. But like personally, I was a teacher before doing PT, and so I always put that down. I don't talk a lot about it. It's one little line that I taught for a couple of years. And simply because if that does come up in an interview, those are sort of ancillary skills that are not going to hinder me whatsoever. They may help, they may not, who knows? It depends on the interviewer. But it definitely doesn't hurt that I was able to lead 125 kids every day through, lessons. And I was able to manage day-to-day lessons and do communicate these things to the kids, yada, yada, yada. You might have a job, through graduate school in sales for, some sort of watch store or whatever, your clothing store, whatever it happened to be, customer service. All of these things are, if you can spin it at all to some sort of ancillary skill to what you have to do as a clinician, Don't be afraid to put it on there, but you have to know why you're putting it on there. You don't want to put McDonald's and that you just flip burgers. If you didn't, if you were McDonald's and you put that you have customer service, you're forward facing, the client, and you managed all these problems, yada, 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 fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But you need to know why you're putting, prior experiences on there, and they should pertain to something that's going to help you get a job,
McDonald's was my first position, so
Are you serious? That's awesome. That's awesome.
I woke up on it was my 15th birthday. I told my dad that because it was of age where I could work in my small town, and I told him there's 2 places I didn't want to work: Walmart and McDonald's. I'll work anywhere else. He woke me up on my 15th birthday and said, "Congratulations, got you a job at McDonald's." Because it's a small town, so somebody, and that's how you get jobs.
That's funny. That's funny.
That's funny. Going into the interview, I think that's a good segue.
Yeah.
Communicating your value during the interview. Do you have any tips on that?
If you are able to kind of sense what it is that clinic is needing, early on, and figure out how you can fill that role for them, that need, that, the pain point, as they say, that's gold right there. I mean, if you can figure that out through the early stages of the interview, and then, kind of work your way towards being the solution for their problem, it's a home run. Otherwise, you just need to basically present yourself as confident and calm and collected as you possibly can. Because, there's a ton of research on, people with perceived confidence, they get paid more, they win jobs more often. Everything is better if you're confident. That's pretty much what all the little studies that I've been reading have said. So even if you got to fake it till you make it, try and put that calm, foot forward, and be confident, and know, why you have certain things on your resume, know how you are, you can fill the needs that they have. Early on, that's the best tip you can possibly have, just being as calm and collected as you can.
I like that you brought up confidence. I have a story about that. When I was applying for PT school, I went to it was only like 7 in the nation at that time for what they call freshman entry. So the idea was, I knew what I wanted to do when I was coming out of high school. Applied to the school that was straight, fast track, 6.5 years, you get your DPT, and no GRE in between. You have your basically 3 years of undergrad and then 3.5 of graduate school. And I was super late applying. They only had 7 positions at the time, and then I was admitted. I think I got the second to last position, actually. So it's funny how little things turn into big things later on in life. But when I went in, because I was later, I didn't go in on the normal interview day when they had 200 people show up with suits and ties. I didn't even know how to tie a tie when I was applying for this thing. So I walk in, I had to go neighbor to neighbor to neighbor and until, because none of my neighbors knew how to tie ties were either. So finally found somebody that knew how to do like a half Windsor or whatever. And I walked in and the PT interviewed me, really good clinician, really good at connecting with people. I felt so relaxed. And I just remember at the end of the interview, like my arms on the back of the couch, like just having a conversation. And I know I was coming across as confident. And I know that if I would have showed up when everybody else was there, 200 people dressed in ties, I would have flipped because I didn't realize how exclusive, whatever you want, competitive this program was until I was in it.
Yeah.
And, I'm so thankful for that because my confidence would have been like so far.
Oh yeah. So hopefully my wife doesn't watch this podcast, but my very first job interview after PT school was a joint interview with this super cute girl who I just started dating at the time. And for whatever reason, this clinic owner wanted to interview us. And now, my wife was the other clinician at the same time over breakfast. And, here we are in Pagosa Springs, Colorado. I think you've been through there. I can't remember. And, I've got this girl that I'm crazy about. And, of course, I'm going to let her answer the questions first. What do you say to her answer when it's your turn? If you're trying to get the job, I can't just be like, no, don't listen to her. She's just full of smoke. Don't listen to her at all. Actually, the answer is blah, 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 blah. I can't shoot her down, but then what can I do to stand out? So I was so like tiptoeing around, like what's the right thing to say? Because I don't want to offend her. And I don't want to, and it was just a mess. And needless to say, neither of us got the job. And it's like, it might be the only interview one of us didn't get the job from, if I'm not mistaken, because neither of us were able to be like confident and show that, this is what you need. This is how I can fill it. Neither of us could stand out because we both were just gray, compared to one another. So
Got it.
confidence goes a long way for sure.
That's funny. One thing I wanted to talk about with the interviews, and this is something I learned with like talk shows. And so when you have these actors, whatever, they're going up on these talk show hosts, and you see them on Kelly Live, or you see them on, trying to think of some other ones.
I don't know any. Sorry.
Late night, whatever. They go on and they always have really like interesting stories, and you're engaged and you're laughing, and they prepare for that. Those are stories they're prepared to talk about. And so when you go into these interviews, be prepared with those things that you want to bring up. And it's almost like like a politician, where you watch them and there's a question answered, and then they're talking about something completely different. And basically they're redirecting the question to where they're talking about what they want to talk about. And you want to think about it like that. So an example of this would be when I was getting into home health, I didn't have the experience, but I talked about my outpatient experience a lot. And so when they asked, like, what's your experience been? Well, my last clinic, and I didn't mention that this was necessarily my first home health job. They were aware of that, but I also didn't highlight it. I also didn't say, well, I don't like, this is my first home health. Like, they already knew that.
You're not being sneaky. You're not trying to pass it over. You're just not highlighting it.
Mm-hmm, yeah, absolutely. And that's when I brought up the course that I was working on. So when you have those things that you think would be highlightable, those things on those first 6 points, have those in mind and be ready to talk about it and how it relates to the job that you're applying to now, whether it's new or whether it's, just the next travel contract, and it's been the same one that you've been for 2 years. You probably have some really either tough or epic patient stories that you can bring up, where you've handled conflict, where you've handled problem solving, where you've had difficult relations with somebody else at work, and you're able to come out for the better afterwards, where you're looking like a really, really solid candidate when you're talking to these individuals on the phone.
Yeah, I mean, that brings up a great point. Is, we all have the standard interview questions. Why don't we have answers for those questions? Because we're all blindsided by the, what's your biggest fault as a clinician? And then how many people are like, oh, I don't really know, but why don't you have it written down? Like every single interview is going to ask that question. So have a good answer for that question. If you can Google just about any of these top 15, interview questions and write them out. If you're serious about getting a particular job, and the way the market is, at least currently today, it's getting much more competitive in the travel world. Like, you need to be able to stand out. So you should be a little bit more purposeful than maybe it was like 5-10 years ago, and write down those answers and know how to answer those questions, because everyone's going to have, you're going to get probably 2 or 3 of those top 15.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I do think if you are worried about something, or you're thinking you're falling short on that, I think it's so easy to like keep thinking of that, and then you just accidentally like bring it up during the interview. But what's the first 2 rules of dating is be attractive and don't be unattractive. So don't be unattractive when you're on the phone with these interviews. Highlight the things that are important, and if they happen to bring up something, don't shy away from it. Be direct, but also have like, that's true. This is my first experience, or yes, I haven't worked level 1 trauma yet. However, I'm taking these steps because this is really where I want to go with my career, and this is where I see myself moving forward. And also, I loved the piece when you were talking about talking like you've already gotten the job, that perceived confidence, where how many PTAs am I going to be supervising, instead of, if I get the job, how many PTAs?
Yes.
Like that.
Yeah.
And kind of phrasing those questions. And it seems super awkward when you talk about it, but once you're in it, it flows, and it goes so smoothly. That's something that surprised me, is how well it went.
Yeah. And you can kind of just like sort of sneakily work in that you'd have some cottage knowledge, so instead of saying, oh, well, what kind of EMR do you use? instead of phrasing it that way, say, well, do you guys use clinician or do you use web PT or do you use therapy source? Or is it something else? It's the same question as saying, basically, what EMR are you using? But instead I'm dropping that I've used 3 already that I'm familiar with. And so, they're like, oh, well, he's familiar with, maybe I'm familiar with one of them that they use. And if not, I'm familiar with 3 others. So therefore, it's going to be pretty easy to transition to yet another EMR, which, gosh, I don't know how many EMRs we've all been through now, but, there are ways to, instead of phrasing the question from a sort of a point of weakness, to phrasing the question from a point of strength. And so I liked your example of, instead of how many, am I going to have to work with PTAs or supervise clinicians, or how many, it's just a confidence, it brings that out so much more.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think that's super important.
Yeah. And just some last tips on these interviews. As you're going down the list, when you're hiring somebody on, if you get a phone call and you miss the phone call, they're moving on to the next person. So it's very important to try and answer as quickly as you can, even if you are in a bad spot. I'm sure maybe Steve's got a crying child in the background, but even if you answer and say, hey, I'm not in a great place right now, can I call you back in 5 minutes and get to somewhere quiet? That will keep them from moving on to the next person. And then you might call back, later, and they're already on the phone with the next clinician who, again, the cards are in their favor. If it's somebody who fit, they're going to stop.
Oh, yeah.
That.
Yeah. And I've heard people say, oh, I get so many phone calls from robocalls and I get all these pranks. Because I know personally I get probably 4 or 5 a day right now of these robocalls. And when I'm looking for a job, like I was, 3 months ago, I answered every single phone call. And sure, I block it after I hang up, but I'm going to answer that phone call if I'm looking for a job, because you don't want to get passed up. It's so competitive right now.
Yeah, definitely. And I think something that's helped me out is just starting with a natural conversation. Hi, how are you? And just kind of small talking. And if you're familiar with the clinic, you can drop, information. Hopefully you are familiar with the area, or you can say something so you can kind of show that you're already interested. You've already done some homework. And I usually say like, oh, happy Tuesday or something like that. Like, show off your personality a little bit. Don't make it so straight to the point with the interview. And then once you have that rapport, it's going to be so much easier moving forward because you're already conversational. It's easier to drop in stories. It's easier. Oh, you said you had grandbabies. Like what was this past weekend like, or something like that. And then maybe they were like, well, I'm working all the time because we need an extra person. And so you can get some information like that.
Yeah.
Even when you are after the interview's over, maybe they were already asking you, hey, do you want this position? Or maybe they were like, hey, we're going to move forward, or whatever it might be. You just got done with the interview. For that next step, when you're communicating value, maybe it's a lower offer than you would like. Communicating that value, is that to the staffing agency for you, or is that to the client or the person at the facility that was just on the phone?
I just go through the agency. I don't, because they have their, at least the agencies that I've been working with lately, they have a separate account rep versus, a recruiter. And so those are 2 separate conversations, 2 different people altogether. So I don't go on that end, because obviously your agency is going to be, wanting to take a bit of profit from you being there for all the work that they're doing, marketing their clinicians. Like, they need to make some money. Well, all of us need to make money in this deal, and so I leave that's their conversation. My conversation then becomes me and my recruiter.
Got it.
As a traveler.
Great.
If this was a perm job, obviously you transition from that interview and you can go right into the negotiation, immediately. And the value of a really strong interview is that it gives you all the leverage when it comes to the negotiation part, even as a traveler. So I did a little work with a ACL back to sport, actually, to bring that topic up again, for soccer players. It's an ACL back to sport and prevention program that I kind of helped design for a local soccer team. And somehow it came up in a home health job interview. And I don't remember how it came up. I think they saw it on my resume and I just buried it there for whatever. But they really wanted us to come. And the interview went well and I hung up, and they talked to the recruiter, and the recruiter calls me up and says, hey, they really want you. In fact, they've actually raised $1 on their bill rate because they were really impressed with, all the extra stuff that you've done at this other clinic. And, that's an example of how, like, having a strong interview, having a strong interview is super duper important, even if you're not negotiating with that particular individual. And how some of those extra things that you can provide, that added value that we've kind of been talking about last podcast and this one, can play out. Because, like, the ACL thing has nothing to do. I've yet to see an ACL, and I've been doing home health off and on for years now. I don't see any in home health. But what it showed them, and I'm kind of guessing here at this point, is that you have the initiative to go out and do that extra work, and read some extra literature and reach out and help people in the community, and therefore, in their minds, that's going to translate to our clients, and therefore we want this guy. So having that strong interview is super important, even if you're not negotiating with that exact same person later.
Awesome. That's great. And just reflecting on some of the past podcasts, always recommend before you start those negotiations to have everything kind of lined out for what you're walking into with that interview. It's going to save you a lot of headaches down the road. And when you open up that conversation, that if you've already accepted the interview based on that amount, you don't necessarily want to say no to the job interview. So if you do happen to save your negotiations for after the interview only, that is a way you can say no. But if you've already accepted it, said yes to this amount, you move forward, you take the interview, and you say no because of that amount, that can
it's not good.
That can ruin the relationship with the recruiter. I shouldn't say ruin. They'll still work with you, but maybe those VIP clients that they had coming in, maybe they don't want to put them towards you. Maybe you were their number one. Now you're kind of lower on the list. And so they're going to offer it to the travelers that they know that will take the interview, will be excited, and will take the job if they've already said yes to it.
Yeah. My little phrase when I've been pitched those type of interviews by the recruiter is I just simply say, yeah, it's in the ballpark. It's in the ballpark of what we could deal with, and if it's not, I obviously don't say that, but if it's, if I feel like it's reasonable, close enough to what we need to make for our family's needs, then, I phrase it that way. I don't agree to that set amount right in, because I think if it's not exactly what I want to make, why bother?
Absolutely.
And you don't want to waste everyone's time.
Yeah, for sure. And there are always reasons or something that pops up during the interview that you just, maybe is a little bit different about this place. Maybe it's more rural. Maybe you're not going to be able to find housing. Maybe there's some concerns. You're going to be the only clinician there. You're going to be having 3 more people underneath you, whatever it might be. And you can always deny a job based on the interview, but do not accept a position. Say yes to that amount. Say, yeah, it sounds good. Take the interview. Ask for the wiggle room. If they don't come up any, and then you're like, no, it's not enough money, that's gonna be a damper on the relationship.
Yeah.
But if something pops up in the interview and you're like, hey, this is a concern, this isn't something I was expecting, you can always turn down a job after that interview, and that's not going to hurt the relationship. It's going against what you've already previously accepted. And then moving forward and changing your mind. So I wanted to drive that.
Yeah, that's a great point though. The interview is not just them interviewing you. You're also interviewing them, and hopefully you have some questions for them. I mean, ideally you've done a little bit of research. Maybe it's, if it's home health that keeps coming up for us, because we're both currently in that setting, finding out, how big is this territory that I have to do? What kind of productivity do I have to do if I'm, really any setting? What sort of productivity is expected? If it's something that puts you out of your comfort zone, maybe it's not a job that you want, and that's totally okay. That's the great part about traveling, is you can be a little bit more picky than being landlocked, to a certain city. So these are things that you need to figure out. One of the things that we communicate to people is that these jobs generally exist for a few reasons. Either it's in a tough to place city, it's kind of a dumpy location, or maybe it's out in the middle of nowhere, or it's a hard setting. Some of the home health companies and SNFs have a little bit harder time setting, or maybe the job itself, there's something wrong going on there. They can't hold on to clinicians for one of those 3 reasons. They're having a hard time keeping clinicians. It's kind of up to you to figure that out while you're on that interview. And you can sometimes, if you got a good rapport with them, you can just straight up ask them like, hey, what's going on? Why is this job available? And maybe they tell you, maybe they don't. But if there's something toxic going on and they just trash the therapist before you in the interview, it's probably not the right setting for you. Or if they're expecting you to do some crazy productivity, like try and work that stuff out beforehand so you don't get, stuck.
Absolutely. And something that I used to feel super awkward about is sending, I always send emails after a recruiter phone call just to say, hey, this is what we went through. Let me know if there's anything that I missed or misunderstood. And I've done that for recruiters. I felt awkward when I first did that, but not nearly as awkward as when I started doing it for the actual interviews for the facilities. And that has been something that has made me feel more confident with actually taking the job. Whereas we have a little bit of documentation there to say, like, actually, this was the productivity that was told to me, that we went back. That's something that we talked about, and you have it in writing. Even if they don't necessarily respond, because I think maybe, out of 10 times, it's probably like 50-50. Like 50 actually will write back and say, yes, that's correct. But that has made me feel more confident with taking that, because there are some clinics that might be more reliant on travelers for whatever reason, and they can kind of say the right things, and then once you're there, they can kind of deny it. But if you have that, you got a good recruiter that can support you through that. And so that's something I've done. It did feel awkward when I first started, and now it's just a natural part of my interview process of, okay, let me grab your email. Then you also have their contact information for any follow-up questions.
Yeah, perfect.
All right, Steve. Well, thanks so much for that. If travelers listening to this and wondering where they can find out more information on you or more content from you, where can they go?
Yeah, ptadventures.com is our blog. There's like 100-something articles. I mentioned in the prior episode, but the search bar is fantastic and highly recommend using that because there's so many articles. And then we also have a course. It's at ptadventures.thinkific.com. There's links through our website as well. And that's mainly for, not just, interviews and things like that, but it's the whole process of planning out your career and basically taking control so that you are in charge of the direction your career is going to take you. And that's both in CEUs and in, contract negotiation.
Absolutely. And it's very, very cheap course. You can hop on it now while it's still that price. And the links will be in the show notes for those that are interested in learning more about that. It is a very well done course. There's a lot of thought put into it. I know we were talking when you were developing it. And of course, I mean, again, you've had the experience as a teacher. Like, of course, you have a whole plan, set out education plan.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's really well done. It's very actionable, and highly recommend it. I did a testimonial for you.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, you're right on the homepage,
hey,
man.
There you go. But yeah, I don't promote things that I don't believe in, and I absolutely believe in this course. So definitely go check it out. If you're looking for the next episode of the New Medical Nomads podcast, we do the formal launches on the New Medical Nomads podcast Facebook page. Check it out there. If you want the early access to the episodes, YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, your favorite podcast app will be on there. And then all the hearts, likes, comments, shares, any of that, reviews help more people to see this information, which helps us allow to help more people. Whole point of the show. So thank you so much for those that support. And Steve, thank you so much for coming on. I think we got one.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. Everybody have safe adventures. Everybody have safe travels.